Tonight we explore the diverse musical settings inspired by the poetry of Bob Dylan, first through discussion, then through performance. Full bios are included in your printed program, but let me briefly introduce our distinguished participants. The discussion component of our evening will be moderated by the inimitable Greil Marcus. He is the author of numerous books about music and American cultural history, and you couldn't ask for a more knowledgeable critic to moderate an evening about Dylan. We're delighted to welcome him back to the Graduate Center. Our colleague John Corigliano continues to add to one of the richest, most unusual, and most widely celebrated bodies of work any composer has created over the last 40 years. His numerous scores have been performed and recorded by many of the most prominent orchestras, soloists, and chamber musicians in the world. He's a distinguished professor at CUNY's Lehman College and here at the Graduate Center, and is also on the composition faculty at the Juilliard School. We're also delighted to be hosting Howard Fishman, the acclaimed singer, guitarist, and band leader, whose music is inspired by a deep passion for New Orleans jazz, pop, gospel, and country music, but is filtered through a contemporary and completely original aesthetic. He will participate in the discussion during the first half of the program and then perform with his band in the second half. Performing John's music tonight will be Amy Burton and Stephen Gosling. Amy Burton, one of New York's most notable sopranos, has sung more than a dozen leading roles at the New York City Opera, and since 1993 has been on the Metropolitan Opera's roster. The distinguished pianist Stephen Gosling is both a soloist and chamber musician. He was trained at the Juilliard School and has performed throughout the world and made over 35 recordings. Now, to begin the program tonight, please welcome Greil Marcus, John Corigliano, and Howard Fishman.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. As I'm the moderator, I will be going back and forth. I hope it won't be a complete ping pong. John has created a series of compositions performed on this CD called Mr. Tambourine Man by an extraordinary singer named Hilla Plitman. And the genesis of this work was that people kept telling you to listen to Bob Dylan, or that he had written extraordinary songs that were really poems. You decided, not knowing the music, that you would just look at the lyrics, and you got a book of lyrics and you read them, and you were intrigued, you were drawn in, and you decided to create musical settings and musical extensions of these works completely on your own, without reference to whatever Bob Dylan or anyone else might have done with these same songs. So I have to ask you, how did you avoid hearing any Bob Dylan in the course of the last 40 years?
Well, everybody asks me that, so I'm pretty used to answering that question. Say in the 60s, I listened to a lot of contemporary classical music, Stravinsky, Copland, etc. I didn't listen to a lot of pop music, but I was fascinated by the Beatles because I'm drawn by my ear to the music first, the lyrics second. And musically, they were very unusual. They did all sorts of things that we did, and contemporary composers did. They did it very naturally, and it was very ingenious and caught my ear immediately. Folk singing is a bit different than that. Folk singing is a very simple kind of melody and accompaniment. It's basically 8-bar phrases. It uses 3 to 4 chords, and more importantly, the song stays the same from verse, chorus, and doesn't really change with the emotional intensity, say, of the lyrics. So I'm sure I did hear Bob Dylan at a coffee shop when I was having a cappuccino and talking to somebody, but what I didn't happen is my ear didn't go to it, because it would have gone to it if he had done something quirky for me as a musician. Then I would have heard it, and then I would have heard the incredible words. So I didn't hear it, and it's a good thing I didn't hear it, because if I had heard it, I could never write these cycles, this cycle, because I would be influenced either to do everything that he didn't do, or to use things that he did do. I mean, there's no way not to be influenced once you hear it. So I come to that with innocence, the poetry. And in fact, it did happen exactly as you said. I was looking for, Carnegie Hall had commissioned me for the millennium to write a song cycle, big song cycle. And I wanted an American poet, but I didn't want an American poet that only spoke to other poets and lovers of poetry. I said, isn't there anybody who's a great poet that speaks to everyone? And a friend of mine said, well, if you listen to the songs of Bob Dylan, I think you'll see that he's a great poet that speaks to everyone. And so I sent away for this book of lyrics, no music, looked them all through and loved them, and what I did was I actually Xeroxed the ones that I thought I could set. I didn't think I could set all of them because some were not for me and some were, and I put them in a kind of order that I thought made sense to me, with a kind of prelude that introduces the time, which is Mr. Tambourine Man, and a postlude at the end, Forever Young, like a benediction, and then 5 central poems about the coming of awareness that he had politically, because I thought that was what interested me most. And then I set them. Now, classical composers from Bach on, before Bach, we set music with trying to picture the words and the emotional content. So even though we may have a melody that repeats, we would do something either to the accompaniment or the melody or both to change it if the feeling of the text is different, which is not the way folk music goes. So I set them my way. And of course, having grown up in the world of contemporary music, have a completely different harmonic, rhythmic, etc. sense. This is a very difficult cycle to find a singer to sing. And this recording with Hila Plittman is quite extraordinary, because Amy does this too, but it's very difficult. You have to have the technique of an opera singer. You have to have a high B flat and a low B flat and everything in between, and you have to be able to read complex meters and do jumps and leaps that are not traditional. But you mustn't sound like an opera singer, because that would be a disaster. As you can imagine, the incongruity would be funny. And so when it's done with piano, the singer can sing it just the way it is, because the piano isn't as loud as, say, an orchestra. I orchestrated the piece, and I wrote for amplified soprano and orchestra, because I wanted the singer not to have to ride above that orchestra, because the minute a singer has to project like an opera singer, they sound like an opera singer. There's no way you can avoid that. So I wanted to have it so that the singer could sing in a natural way, and yet we could amplify it, and the orchestra could play in a natural way, in a really big way, and they could complement each other. So the version for orchestra is amplified. The version for piano is not amplified. I felt that was the best solution I could have. And I must say that there are not many singers who can sing this, because most singers that are trained operatically, just in the way they pronounce things, just the language itself, becomes incongruous to the text. So that's what I did, and I really love the poetry, I really do. And I said it the same way, if there were a poem by Goethe, and Brahms would set it, and Schumann would set it, and Wolf would set it, and all be the same poem. And that's what I told Dylan's manager. I said, that's what I'm doing, because I had to make it clear to Dylan that I was not taking his music at all. And that was hard to understand. Why? What are you going to do then? And I said, I'm going to take the words and treat them as poetry and set them as a composer sets poetry.
Well, let me interject at this point. what I found most striking on this set was your version of Masters of War, which is one of the shorter pieces of the seven. And, you know, it's a song from 1963, you know, a flat-out protest song against arms merchants who do terrible things in the world. And, you know, it's always struck me in terms of his words as incredibly automatic. You know, a song written more by the times than by an individual. It's clearly not struck other people that way, because so many people have recorded it, have been drawn to it. And it rides on the melody of a very, very old British ballad called Nottingham Town.
Didn't know that.
Completely absurdist song that probably goes back 400 years. It's all about flagellants and people with their heads flying off, and it's very much a musical version of a Hieronymus Bosch painting. And when you take away that melody, which almost everybody sticks to because it is a backbone, in your version, the song goes up in the air. It's flying. It has been cut loose like a balloon. And it's really a remarkable effect. I mean, recently, the most striking version of Masters of War I had heard before yours was by Viggo Mortensen, who appeared at a tribute to Howard Zinn on a public television station in Boston early last year. And he sang the song holding it like this and looking incredibly stern, as only Viggo Mortensen can look stern. And he sang it unaccompanied, as if it was an old Appalachian ballad, as if in fact it was Nottingham Town, which is circulated in the Appalachians for 200 years or more. And it was one of the most eerie things I'd ever heard. But here, it was not like it cut itself free, for me anyway, from any other versions. And yet it retained a stridency, a vehemence, a desperation that people try to put into the song, and that Dylan, in his own version, very pointedly didn't. There's never any histrionics in his performance. It's all flat and straight ahead and 1, 2, 3. So I'm just interested in how that piece came together, both for you and Hilla Plittman.
Well, as you said, Dylan did not do that. There's several ways of treating very, very emotionally dense material. And one of the ways is to give it the accompaniment and the music that projects that intensity. And the other one is to play against it. That is to sing it flat so that the words and the music are in stark contrast to each other. And it becomes almost ironic that the music is so distant from the savagery of the words. I read the words. I didn't know anything about this. And it was the most savage poem I'd ever read. And I responded by setting a savagely. Now, there's a school that says don't necessarily go with the emotions, go against the emotions. And I did that in some songs, in some places. But this song was so furious and so rage-filled that I just went with it and had my singer shout. I mean, she really, at one point, she just screams at them. I mean, she's quite mad. And the last things where she stands over the grave till I know that you're dead. I mean, it's just, I have an anvil hitting like this, hammering with the orchestra so that you feel the finality of that and the brutality.
That song scares people, even people who claim to treasure it. Howard Zinn himself, in a book called, what is the name of this book? artists in times of war, included Masters of War, Bob Dylan, the lyrics of Masters of Bob Dylan's song. But as you say with the last verse, I hope that you die and your death will come soon, and I'll follow your casket on a pale afternoon, and I'll watch while you're lowered down to your deathbed, and I'll stand over your grave till I'm sure that you're dead. Howard Zinn left out that verse because it wasn't nice. And it
Sure
was
wasn't.
it was quite something to see it not buried in the slightest. Now I want to turn to Howard, and again, I want to focus on one song. Now, Howard did a remarkable project some time ago where he decided to put together a performance solely of songs drawn from Bob Dylan's basement tapes. And John, too, took a song from those remarkable sessions that were really a matter in 1967 and early 68 of Bob Dylan and the musicians who came to be known as the band, living up in the Woodstock area and fooling around every afternoon with old songs, with current songs on the radio. Robbie Robertson of the band once described the session as Dylan taking the rest of them to school in a very surreptitious way, teaching them about music that they didn't know. And then they began to fall into writing songs, creating songs of their own, and many of those songs have gone on to become really part of a common language. This Wheel's on Fire, and You Ain't Going Nowhere, and Tears of Rage, and I Shall Be Released. And probably the most mysterious song of all of the basement tape recordings, and they're well over 100, and that are circulating, that have been bootlegged, and there are probably a whole lot more that no one's ever heard, is a song called I'm Not There. When Dylan and the band realized that they were writing some quite remarkable new material, they put together a publishing demo. They sent it to Dylan's publisher so he could press it up and send it to various people in hopes that they'd record these songs. And a lot of people did. They began coming out very, very quickly in 1968 in versions by all sorts of people, Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Manfred Mann, and many others, the Byrds. And one song was, as I said, I'm Not There. And on the original tape that Dylan sent to his publisher, you can actually hear, in a later dub, you can hear the publisher talking. And after I'm Not There plays, you can hear this guy say, I cannot understand him. In other words, what am I supposed to publish? Because this song is quite famously barely a song at all. I want to read you just a brief little quotation from Brian Morton's first novel, The Dylanist. Brian Morton is a wonderful New York novelist. You might know the film of his book Starting Out in the Evening, but he's written many other books, and they're all different from those other people write. Well, here's The Dylanist. She fell into conversation with the first fat man she saw. What do you do, he said, fitting 2 potato chips into his mouth. I go to parties and I only talk to the fat guys, she thought. Owen was home writing. She thought of it as an act of fidelity to talk only to the unattractive guys. She started telling them about her jobs, and she was talking on automatic pilot, hardly listening to what she was saying. Instead, she was listening to Dylan. Going through the host's record collection, she'd found a bootleg album that included I'm Not There, a legendary, never released, never completed song from the basement tape sessions, a song she'd heard just once the summer after high school and she'd been searching for ever since. And it came on as she was talking. It was even more haunting than she remembered. She touched the fat guy's wrist. This, she said, may be the greatest song ever written. Well, it's barely written. There are fragments, there are phrases, there are lines you think you can you know what they are, and the next time you hear them, you realize you have no idea what it is. They're lines that are clearly just there to fill up a line until Dylan can get to the line that he's carrying around in his head and he wants to put somewhere. And yet this entire performance is invested with an emotional commitment, with a sense of high stakes, with a sense that somebody's life is at stake. Maybe the singer's, maybe the person he seems to be singing about, maybe yours as you listen. That the lyrics cease to, the fact that you don't know what's there, that this is a film that's been edited completely out of order, only adds to the gravity, the sense of a whirlpool that's sucking you down. What Howard did, it was utterly remarkable, and as far as I know, he's the first person who ever dared to do this. He performed and he recorded a complete version of this song with every word legible, with the whole thing there. And I want to know, what gave you, where did you get the nerve to do that? And how did you do it? The Sonic Youth did it after you did in Todd Haynes' film I'm Not There, for the music running under the credits. However, they kept it real low and slurred, so maybe they covered up the parts where they weren't sure. But you are sure. So I'd like to know
I'm
about
sure
that.
the words that I decided on, and I'm not sure that all of those words were totally ever sung by Bob Dylan. Some of them I think were, I think a lot of them were, and some of them just seemed, I just went for what it seemed like he was going for, even if he didn't quite get it. And there are just a lot of slurs where you just can't understand what he's going for. And I just did the best that I could with it, listening to it over and over again and pressing the pause button and writing a few things down, and then trying to cobble together a lyric that seemed to make sense. And, you know, I have to say that my impetus for doing this project, it was actually 3 years ago, before the I'm Not There film came out, that we first premiered this project, and we did it over 3 nights here in New York at Joe's Pub, and we performed the bulk of the Basement Tapes over those 3 nights, all those songs. You know, I had been a fan of this music for a very long time, and I had had access to the bootleg material that was out there, and it had always been among my favorite music. But I have to say that it was reading your book that really inspired me to go ahead with this project, because I felt like this is some of the best music that Bob Dylan ever made, and there's so many people out there who had never heard it. And I didn't want to just do a cover version, just get up there and do Bob Dylan and the band, because that would not be very interesting. So I wanted to try to bring something new to it, and at the same time respect what was being done. And I think that I found the emotional linchpin in reading your book, because and I'm not saying this just to sound whatever, I really felt that in reading the book, you know, when you hear that music for the first time or for the 100th time, you have all the feelings that you talk about in these books, but they're not necessarily articulated in your head. And then when I read them articulated in your book, it's just nailed straight on, like what you talk about the singer in I'm Not There. That's a feeling that I had when I listened to the song, but I hadn't quite gotten there with my intellect and with my heart, you know, and locked together. So it was in reading the book that gave me the courage to do it. And I kind of knew that this was among Dylan's bootleg material, one of, if not the most sort of famous of the bootlegged Bob Dylan songs. And I thought, because the Dylan community is so large and so passionate, that there might be people who really cried foul at anybody daring to attempt this song. And the very first person that I sent this music to, when we recorded it, and I was planning to release the CD, and I sent it to Mr. Marcus here, and you wrote me back, and you gave me sort of a thumbs up on the I'm Not There, and I thought, well, if you think it's okay, then I'm not going to worry about, you know, the rest of the Dylan community.
One thing I was really struck by in this performance, and especially listening to it now, There's one song that you do that is not on the Basement Tapes, Pretty Polly, a very, very old English folk song that's lived in the United States for hundreds of years. And it's a song that Bob Dylan sang in Greenwich Village clubs in the very early 60s as part of his repertoire forever. His song Hollis Brown is really based on that melody. But in your performance of Pretty Polly, it's by far the longest piece that you perform. It's the most experimental. It's the most adventurous. It's the noisiest of all these performances. It seems to be the performance where you say, "Okay, I can do anything I want. This road is open." Did you feel? Is that a misreading?
No.
Is the fact that this song not being part of the Basement Tapes gave you a feeling of freedom, and the fact that it's not a Bob Dylan song, he didn't write it.
Right.
It belongs to all of us. It has come down over the centuries. Is because it has a different spirit than the other recordings.
Yeah, I think because it's one of two songs that we did as part of that 3-night set that were not written or recorded by Bob Dylan, and we included them because they're talked about in your book. And I'll do a couple readings tonight as we perform from the book, which is what I always do when we do the Basement Tapes project. But it was this one in Last Kind Word Blues, the Geechee Wiley song, that we included, and I prefaced them both with readings because you talk about them extensively. And I think the fact that they weren't written by Bob Dylan, especially Pretty Polly, because it is so old and it is such a raw blank canvas, that I sort of said to the band, forget about any rules or anything. Let's just see what happens. And every time we do that song, it's very different.
Well, I think it's there that you and John are really playing the same kind of game, where you are not tethered in any way to what anybody else thinks this song ought to be. I don't know where we are in time. I need some help.
Well, it's 7:33.
7:33. Well, we have a little more time. You do clothesline blues in your set, in this suite. Clothesline blues, one of the most deadpan of all the Basement Tapes recordings. It's sung by Bob Dylan in a voice of what seems to be a teenage boy who really doesn't want to do his chores. And he has to do these various things, and he knows there's no way to get out of them. So he says, well, I did, and I had to do that, and then these things happen. And as he's speaking in this dour voice, all kinds of extraordinary events happen. There's a conversation between two people, which is really kind of like, I heard it's going to rain today. It might. But instead they say, have you heard the news? Oh, what's that? The vice president's gone mad. Well, that's too bad. And it's all done in that manner. It was originally called Answer to Ode, as in Ode to Billy Joe, where everybody is sitting around the table and they're eating and oh, did you hear Billy Joe jumped off the bridge? Really? You don't say. And he's dead, too. What do you know? And it goes on like that. And they just ran with that. And it seemed to me you caught that. That spirit caught you if you didn't catch it, because you didn't know the recorded version.
Right.
But it's
By the way, when I heard, I loved those blues.
But your version,
song.
it seems to me, retains that stolidity.
What I heard in that song was a boy growing up in a town, in a yard, and no one cared what happened outside of the yard, in a sense. The mother didn't care, the father didn't care. Nobody cared. It was just the laundry, it was I'm reading a book, it was day-to-day stuff. And even when a neighbor comes with shocking news, the mother says, that's too bad, you know, like nothing we can do about it, that kind of thing. But what really interested me was the last few words of that song, because the father says, get in the house and take all the stuff in too, and they go in the house, and then he says, and then we shut all the doors. And for me, that last line was very important, because that's what they were doing. They were shutting all the doors to everything outside. And so it's a very eerie setting of the last line that I do. I just stop the orchestra and she sings down a scale, and it's like there's nothing, we shut the doors, there's nothing out there. And this is the beginning of the beginning of the 5 songs of awakening, with Blowing in the Wind being the next. How can you shut the doors, in a sense? How can you ignore what's happening? So this was, to me, the beginning of a journey. The beginning of the journey was, there is no journey. I'm in my house, my family, I do my chores, you know, the neighborhood, it does what it does, and we're not really caring about it, and we shut the doors. The second one is, how can you shut these doors, to me? And so that it was the beginning of the going out and seeking and knowledge of injustices and things to care about, things of the outside world that you should care about. And that was the beginning of my 5-song journey. So I really, I loved it, because I don't know if you know, Samuel Barber wrote a very, very beautiful piece called Knoxville, Summer of 1915, James Agee poem. And it's about growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and it has very much the same kind of poetic style. It's, you know, my father coiled the hose, and a trolley went down the street with its sparking, and this, and it's a picture of Knoxville in 1915, and also of a kind of family that's closed in and watching this very peaceful town in this very beautiful way. And it has that air to it. It has that feeling to it, accepting that it also has something else to me, which was the idea of this at the end, of closing the doors, and therefore not only does she say, nothing we can do about it, but the end of the poem says, nothing we can do about it. And that was the beginning for me of, I wanted to put these 5 songs in an order after the, you know, Mr. Tambourine Man and the ending, to put those 5 and really start with, how do you start before you're interested? And then how do you get interested? And then Masses of War comes after that. And that is, how, not only how can you ignore it, but these people are, you know, to be actually stood over their grave. I mean, to me, it was like going like that. And so I was looking at them. See, they weren't chronological for me. I just Xeroxed the poems I thought I liked, and there were more than those. And I put them out, and I read them, and I thought about them, and I said, how can I build an arc in the middle that tells the story of a young man who starts out in a little town not knowing, realizes knowing is important, sees the dangers of the world, the undercurrent of the world. The Joker and the thief and all along the watchtower are there, but nobody sees them. The princes don't see them. In many ways, it's really weird to me that that's in 3 verses that sound the same music, because the Joker's music is insane, and the thief's music is oily, and the people who watch are indifferent and sing over it, and all of them play a part. And then Chimes of Freedom is the final of that, in which I think is a great, great poem, and it says these injustices will be righted, and then comes Forever Young. So I built, by putting these together, I built a shape that obviously Bob Dylan didn't do, because he didn't write them that way. But I thought it was, for me as a composer, the way I would like to write it, to say what I feel about these poems.
Well, we're going to move on to the performance part of the evening, which I'm pretty sure will involve no closed doors, but only open ones.
February 2007 when he was presented as part of the Lincoln Center American Songbook Series, performing as Bob Dylan in the band's Basement Tapes project. And we're delighted to have him performing excerpts of that project for us tonight. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say, I wasn't trying to be sycophantic in the talk beforehand when I was praising Greil's book, but I really was very inspired by this book, and I do use it whenever we perform this project to introduce a couple of the tunes, and I'm going to do that tonight. First, I'd like to introduce the band very briefly. Hold your applause, because we're in a little bit of a rush, I guess, for time, but I'll introduce them again individually later. It's Maz Swift on violin, Nathan Peck on the bass, Mark McLean on the drums, Michael Daves on the guitar. Give them all a hand. So in this book, which I recommend to everybody, if you're interested in American music, Mr. Marcus writes, "Revelation was almost as likely as idiocy. In telling one from the other, perhaps less likely than either. The sound, as it is on the original tapes of the best-known basement songs, is clear and intimate, full of air, the shape of every note plain. A sound that makes you feel you're in the room, that places the room around you as you listen. It's a room as it reappears in sound you can almost picture. Low ceiling, dim corners to hide in. So you have to use your imagination this evening a little bit. A room to fool around in, a place where anything can happen, but where nothing happening would make as much sense as anything else." The comic book and me, just us, we caught the bus. Poor little chauffeur, though, she was back in bed on the very next day with a nose full of pus. Yay, heavy and a bottle of bread. 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 It's a one-track town, just brown and a breeze too. Get the meat sweet, we're heading out for Wichita and a pile of fruit. Get the loot, don't be slow, we're gonna catch a trout. Get the loot, don't be slow, we're gonna catch a trout. Get the loot, don't be slow, we're gonna catch a trout. Get the loot, don't be slow, we're gonna catch a trout. Pull that drummer out from behind that bottle. Give me my pipe, we're gonna shake it. Slap that drummer with a pie that smells. Take me down to California, baby. 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 Slap that drummer with a pie that smells. The common book and me, just us, we caught the bus. Poor little chauffeur, though, she was back in bed on the very next day with a nose full of pus, yay, heavy and a bottle of bread. 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 Thank you. Well, let's get right to it because we talked about this song so much. So I'm Not There, 1956 is the name of the song officially, and this is what it says here in the book, among other things about the song. What the author is talking about here is a song that we won't do tonight called The Last Kind Word Blues by Geechee Wiley. And in the context of that old blues song and the singer of that song, he writes, "This is what the singer and the woman in I'm Not There can't do. The singer and I Shall Be Released can do it. That is why compared to I'm Not There, I Shall Be Released is a sentimental parlor ditty. Geechee Wiley can see her face from across the Mississippi River because hers is the only face to see. All those she loves are dead, and there is no hint of community or society, of town and fellowship anywhere in her song. The country it makes is a wasteland, and I'm Not There, all the other characters from the basement tape surround the house where the woman lives, and then they turn and walk away. No one will ever speak to her again. That is how deep the abandonment is, and the question it raises is the question of what crime it is that is secreted in Kill Devil Hills, a town that can leave anyone so far outside of itself as I'm Not There leaves the woman, and its every verse may be in and of itself a crime. It may be that when abandonment or exclusion as profound as that described in I'm Not There is present as a kind of civil death, like a public stoning without stones, there can be no real town, just a collection of individuals bound together by nothing at all. Or it may be a matter of the burden of the town has taken upon itself with its name, a burden that has from one place to another defined the country from the time of the Puritans on down. When you can't find the devil, you kill somebody else instead. In the words of the police chief, this isn't a Kill Devil Hills story, it's an American story. But she is all right, she's all the time in my neighborhood. She cries both day and night. I know it because I was there. Well, it's a milestone, but she's down on her luck, and the day makes her lonely, but to me it's hard to bug. I was there. Yes, I believe that she'd stop him if she would stop to care. I believe that she'd look upon the side and to care. And I'm lost on the way she's on my way, but I don't belong there. No, I don't belong to her, I don't belong to everybody. She's my price for seeking angels, but she don't hear me cry. She's a long-hearted mystic, but she can carry on. When I'm there, she's all right, but she's not when I'm gone. Heaven knows there's an answer, she's not calling anyone. She's a wave-sailing beauty, but she's mine for the one. And I'm lost in hesitation, my temptation lets it runs. But she don't holler me, but I'm not there, I'm gone. Tonight, just like I cried the night before. And I think about her eyes, but still I dream about the door. She's a long-distance savior, blind faith. Who's to tell she don't hang information? She's my own fare thee well. Yes, I went out underneath the levee. You know I was born to love her, but the way is the kingdom way, so high up above her. And I'll run, but I'll race, but she is not too fast to slip. I'll not deceive her, I'm not there, I'm gone. The rainbow that was shining yesterday, and now she's here beside me, and I'd like to have her stay. And it's all information I can see, but it's not. I wish that I could help her, but I'm not there, I'm gone. But there's a certain thing that I learned from my friend Jim. He always makes sure I understand, and that is that there's a certain way that we all must learn to swim if we expect to live off of the fat of the land. Open the door, Richard, I heard it said before. Open the door, Richard, I heard it said before. And I ain't gonna hear it said no more. There's a certain thing that I learned from my friend Mouse, that friend of mine who never blushes, and that is that one must always be sure to flush out his house if he don't expect to be housing flushes. Open the door, Richard, I heard it said before. Open the door, Richard, I heard it said before. And I ain't gonna hear it said no more. Take care of all of your memories, said Nick. for you cannot relive them. And remember when you're out there and you're trying to heal the sick, that you must always first forgive them. Open the door, Richard. I heard it said before. Open the door, Richard. I heard it said before, and I ain't gonna hear it said no more. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Maz Swift will lead us through one of the more famous Spaceman Tape song next.
They say everything can be replaced, and every distance is not near. So I remember every face of every man who put me here. I see my light come shining from the western to the east. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released. They say every man needs protection. They say every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection someplace so